So, welcome everyone. Good morning. Thank you ever so much for joining us today. This is our introduction to effective and practical research data management workshop. I'm Christina Magdar. I'm the Data Collections Development Manager here at UK Data Service. I wear a little bit of two hats in my job. I lead the acquisition of data for the UK Data Archive. So we're talking about large-scale governmental surveys, longitudinal data, but also qualitative and mixed method collections. And I also wear a second hat, which is focused around helping researchers with their research data management practices, because we know to create usable and very good data, we do need to have very good data management practices that we follow throughout the research data lifecycle. And we hope to be able to provide you with tools, templates, and techniques that will just make your life easier. So, the format of the workshop, we're doing some presentations and we explore some key concepts and principles of research data management. We have some exercising using Mentimeter, and again, my fantastic colleague Emma will provide instructions in the chat how to join the Mentimeter. And also, we have a Q&A live session. All the questions are most welcome. We're administering them via Padlet because we want to keep the Padlet open for 48 hours after the event to allow you to add even more questions as they come up. There is a lot of content to be covered today, but once again, everything is recorded. We are making the slides available with all the different links, the tools and templates. So we hope you'll make use of them. And of course, if you have very complex project queries, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We provided our data sharing mailbox, data sharing at ukdataservice.ac.uk, because we can always set up a Zoom or a Teams to discuss with you around the project and see how we can better help you make sure that your data is managed effectively. Workshop overview. We will be talking about the research data lifecycle. This is where everything starts. About the FAIR, but also the care data principles. Care data principles are a bit newer, and I would say they're more focused. However, we'll see that there's applicability to all of the different data that we work with. What is data management planning and why is data management planning important? We'll look at an overview of ethical and legal considerations, as well as what do we need to do to ensure that data is secure, is stored properly, and is backed up as it should be backed up. We're also looking at data curation best practices. How do we document our data? How do we anonymize our data? And finally, we're looking at data sharing strategies. How should we best enable future reuse from our data? And finally, we have the Q&A live session administered via Padlet. Feel free to add questions on the Padlet throughout the event. Um, so warming up, if you join us at the Menti link available in the chat, or you can join directly at Menti if you go to menti.com and use the code 51404955. The very first question, it is a Tuesday morning, so we're warming up. What are the first words that come to your mind when you hear research data management? Cleaning, fair. Fair is getting a lot of traction. Fantastic. Organization, planning, yes. Quality, mandatory, necessary, diversity. The word cloud is moving, so I shall repeat some words. Um, Planning is coming across as the choice. Of everyone, which is fantastic. Thank you, Emma, for providing the code in the chat as well alongside the link. Curation, stress. Well, I really hope today's session is distressing everyone. There are tools, templates, techniques that we can use. And the most important thing is you can get in touch with us to help you throughout your journey. I would say that is the key takeaway message from today. We are very friendly here at the UK Data Service, so please do not stress. Just get in touch with us because there are ways forward. Thank you all so much for participating in the Menti. This is fantastic. We'll have a few mentees throughout the workshop. Now, getting to know you a little bit, what types of data do you work with? Do you work with quantitative, mainly numerical data, qualitative, mixed methods? Are you a primary? So are you a primary researcher? So are you collecting your own data or are you working with secondary data? Quantitative, mixed methods, secondary data, images, numerical data. Such a variety here. That's fantastic. NHS data, yes, health data, that's very important, both primary and secondary. Mixed methods are gaining so much traction nowadays, and we can see it in bids as well. Most funders are now requesting a mixed methods approach. That's amazing. Ethnography, focus group interviews, personal data, yes, and we need to think about, well, when we work with personal data, what are the considerations we need to bear in mind? That's fantastic. Such a diverse audience. PhD research, coding. We do have some guidance on how to code, and our colleagues at Manchester are actually providing training in coding, which might come of use. Map data, smart data. This is amazing. And again, any questions, please feel free to put them on the Padlet as we go through the session today. Now, is there a specific aspect of data management that you are particularly interested in? Curation. Fantastic. Answers are coming in. I'm so grateful to all of you for completing our mentees. They're fantastic in also understanding what do our researchers need to better support them? Are there specific topics that we need to provide more guidance, provide more training? So all of your answers are fantastic. We can see data protection, data sharing, ethical considerations, anonymization, and we do have specific workshops. I'm linking to them throughout the presentations. Very focused on, for example, ethical considerations or anonymization. And actually, ICO have just published new anonymization guidance as of 2 weeks ago. That's fantastic. Transparency. I have gone a bit too further away. Now, a more straightforward question. How confident do you feel in managing data now? We're not tracking anyone, so it's fully confidential. You might not be at all confident. You might be slightly confident, somewhat confident, very confident. This question will come at the very end as well, because we want to see whether there is a change in how confident you feel. And it might be that you'll find it slightly more confusing immediately after the workshop, but with the tools, the templates, and techniques, hopefully, it will give you more confidence throughout time. And again, I can't stress enough, please do get in touch with us at the data sharing at ukdataservice.ac.uk mailbox. It's in the chat as well. We are here to help you as much as we can, and to try to avoid any stress at your end. So thank you all once again for completing the mentees. More to follow shortly. So do keep the link open. In terms of the learning objectives of today, they're mainly two. So to gain an overview of the research data lifecycle, data management planning, and the principles underpinning good data practices, including the fair and care guidelines, but also learn about effective methods to organize, document, store, and share research data responsibly. And by responsibly, we always mean ensuring that your data sharing complies with ethical and legal requirements. As researchers, our main aim is do no harm, so we need to follow the ethical and legal requirements when it comes to data sharing. When we talk about effective research data management, we always think that by employing these techniques, these tools, these principles, we ensure that we are compliant with the ethical standards and applicable legislation, that our data are well organized, quality controlled, and well documented. They are safely stored, backed up, processed, and analyzed. And last but not least, responsibly archived and preserved. Because it needs to be responsibly archived. We seek no harm to participants, so they need to be appropriately shared for future reuse. In a nutshell, RDM practices safeguard the integrity of research in all disciplines and all domains possible. UKRI actually expects research data arising from its funding to be made as open as possible and as restricted as necessary, and good research data management practices should be followed throughout your project. UKRI is one of the main funding bodies within the UK, consisting of multiple research councils, but this expectation is not only from UKRI, it's actually throughout the research community, from other funders, even from research participants. They do want the data that they contribute to be actually used to better society. Now, when we actually employ good research data management practices, there are so many success stories, as we like to call them, and we have a couple of them documented as case studies on our website. And again, all the slides will be made available. I've put so many links in so you get the time to read and understand more about these different practices. One of these case studies was around balancing teams' privacy with the desire to share the data. It's even more difficult when we're talking about underage. Minors, when we work with data, they're vulnerable population. Um, Studies will contain sensitive information as defined by legislation. So, for example, information about health, information about religion. But researchers managed to balance privacy with the need for transparency and data reuse in making this data available for secondary research. In a UK data service, we see it on a daily basis, realistically speaking. Some data might be collected with a very focused purpose in mind. When that data is made available, it's used for so many other different purposes. It's just really, really important to let our participants know that this is what we want to do, that we want to share that data for future reuse. And we talk a bit more in the overview of ethical and legal considerations. Another example is the inspection data HMIP survey journey. They collect data regularly just to monitor prison conditions and treatment. This fantastic research team realized the secondary data reuse in this data that was never made available to other researchers. It was simply used by HMIP. They documented it very, very well. They archived it and shared it for secondary use, and we can see on a monthly basis that usage increasing over and over and over. So many different researchers are finding different other themes to explore rather than just the prison conditions and treatment overall. And you can read more in our case study about this fantastic collection. Now, another mentee, so you don't just keep hearing me talking and talking and talking. What do you think are the most important factors when working with secondary data? We know a couple of you are already working with secondary data, but even for those that are creating primary data, put yourself in the shoes of a secondary researcher. What would you expect to get? Reliability. Answers are coming in. Context, fantastic. Accuracy, consistency, well-structured data, yes. Understanding context, context is very important. Acknowledgement, supporting information, quality, quality and reliability. Context are the three. most used terms. That's fantastic. And this is actually what research data management is all about, making sure that we document. So we have the context, we have the quality in the data. We don't just, for example, archive, I don't know, a CSV file. That's it. I only have a CSV file. We quality check it. We make available a data dictionary with our file. We make available a user guide. Be it short, it doesn't necessarily have to be 50, 60 pages or so, but for providing that context that researchers need. Fair, yes, secondary researchers do need fair data, trustworthy, clear notes, ethical behavior. And this is why we're talking about data sharing strategies as well. How do we share the data to ensure that secondary researchers use it ethically as well? Respect, triangulation risk, checking the source, large sample size. Yes, some research might need really large sample sizes. Some research might actually not need that large of a sample size, and this is why it's important to share as much data as possible. You might have collected data from 20 participants, might have done, for example, a focus group or some semi-structured interviews. You never know how that data might be used for future research. So even if your sample is small, taking all steps to ensure that data sharing whenever possible is really, really important. I am so happy everyone's participating in the Mentimeter. Again, we're using this Menti to learn more about what our researchers need in our training, guidance, and sessions that we do. Now, the very first thing when we talk about research data management is the research data lifecycle. So it usually starts from planning research to collecting data. Now, collecting data that does have a double meaning. It could be collecting primary data or finding secondary sources that we can use for our research. Once we have the data we've collected or secondary research or both, there are so many different research projects now employing both of them. We process and analyze that data. And the big question around how do we preserve, how do we make sure that this data is retained safely, and how do we further share this data? And there are different considerations, for example, from primary to secondary research. If you've already used published data that's available under a bespoke license, you might not be able to share that data. That data is already shared. But you might have created your own derived variables. Well, then you can share the code. So there's always solutions depending on the research project. By preserving and sharing that data, we facilitate the reuse of our data, the reuse of our code, the reuse of our instruments sometimes. So it might be interview questions, it might be questionnaires that other researchers will find value in those instead of having to create new instruments. They can adapt the ones that you've created and of course give you appropriate acknowledgement when doing so. And of course, once we go to the reuse, the life cycle comes back to planning, collecting, processing and analyzing, preserving and sharing, and then again reuse. And it continues. Now, the fair data principles, they were coined back in 2016 by Scientific Data. They do stand for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And as mentioned, we have so many different links, very, very useful, hopefully, links to you that you can read more about the different topics that we're covering today. We sadly only have 1.5 hours. Could probably be here for an entire day to discuss research data management, if not more. But the fair data principles are all around machine actionability when it comes to data. Our colleagues at DANS, the Dutch Data Archive, have created this fantastic fair aware assessment tool. Um, Again, the links are provided. If you're not quite sure about fair, how do I make my data fair? The assessment tool is fantastic, is discipline agnostic, so it doesn't necessarily matter what type of research you are doing, but it goes through the steps of how do I ensure my data is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. In a nutshell, when we talk about Findable, we expect everyone to be using community endorsed discovery metadata standards, and that is not something that the researchers are directly, let's say, responsible for. This is why we're talking about data sharing strategies, because to have this community endorsed discovery metadata standards, you must make your data available in a responsible repository that uses, depending on the discipline, discipline specific metadata standards. Machine readable discovery metadata. Again, this is very important where the data is hosted in a responsible repository. Is that responsible repository being able to communicate with other platforms and make that metadata available? The discoverability metadata, so we're not talking about the data itself, the context of the data. Using unique persistent identifiers, for example, for data at UK Data Service, we use digital objects identifiers from DataSite. But we can even think when it comes to persistent identifiers as a person using ORCIDs. Um, is really important, especially within academia, but I would say it's gaining traction even outside academia nowadays. Setting up an ORCID and making it available in your publications with your data everywhere because it keeps track basically of what you have been doing. When we talk about accessible data, we're talking about data licensing and availability statements, so making it clear to other researchers how the data can be used, or their restrictions or their limitations. Is an embargo needed? There are situations where maybe a 12-month embargo period is needed to allow for your own publication. That's perfectly fine, and funders understand that, journals understand that. But we must be clear that an embargo period applies to our data collection. What are the methods and the tools to access the data? Say, for example, I collected some survey data and I can make it available, well, in SPSS, in Stata, because it has the metadata associated with the variables and the values, but I will also make available an open file format, the CSV, and explain that I have the three different formats to allow as wider accessibility as possible. And also, when it comes to accessibility, that the metadata is preserved indefinitely. There are situations, sadly, where data needs to be withdrawn. We have seen it in practice where the protocols that have been used with the participants specified that the data will only be kept for 10 years. The original idea was for the personal data rather than the anonymized data that's being shared. But because of the specific phrasing, it said all data, the data has to be withdrawn after those 10 years. Retrospective consent was no longer possible to explain to our participants we were only talking about the personal data. So in those situations, the data has to be deleted in line with the protocols used with the participants. However, the metadata, the contextual information, the data dictionaries, the topic guides, if you've done interviews, all of those can be preserved and should be preserved in perpetuity to allow accessibility and discoverability. When we talk about interoperable data, we talk about using standard vocabularies and ontologies, and we link to a few different vocabularies that can be used within the data itself. When it comes to the standard metadata schemas, again, this is very linked to where you share your data. They should be able to make available um, the proper schemas. I'm just checking the chat as well because I can see we have a couple of comments in here. Uh, Oh, with the DIYs, and we are on slide 20. I'm so sorry to hear some people struggle to see the slides. we will share them all. I do apologize about that, and we'll be sure to have a look at that. In terms of the DOIs, yes, for the data itself, DOIs, digital object identifiers, but for the personal persistent identifier, it's actually encouraged to be using org IDs, for example. Everyone can create an org ID, and you can link them in repository. So you have the DOI for the data, and then you have the org ID for the people that have created the data. I hope that I apologize. I probably confused you with that. By all means, do drop a line in the Padlet with questions as well. So DOIs for the data and then org IDs for the people. Um, Oh, that's fantastic. I can see people have managed to sort the slides by using a pop-up window. Again, we'll be having a look at that. We do apologize for any issues with seeing the slides. When it comes to reusable data, again, we're talking about community endorsed data licensing. There might be situations where, yes, we can make available our data under Creative Commons, for example, and we talk about licenses that the repositories are making available. That is fine as long as the community is using those types of licenses. Within the social sciences, for example, end user license agreements are very common and a lot of repositories are using them. And the main focus of these end user license agreements is to ensure that secondary research use is done as possible. Provenance information in the metadata, again, this is very dependent on where you share that data. Responsible repository, trustworthy repositories, they will always make that information available for you. Of course, you have to provide it as a researcher. They will make that information available for you. Using data quality assurance processes, and again, in the slides, we provide a couple of tools and templates to be able to help you with the quality assurance processes, and making sure that you do have open format files for long-term preservation. And again, especially within the social science community, there are situations where proprietary formats are more useful for secondary research, maybe especially when we're thinking about students and those that are newer to learn about data. So we're thinking of SPSS and data, but also having open formats such as CSV is really fantastic. Oh, that's fantastic. It seems the issue with the slides has been resolved. Thank you ever so much. We'll be sure to include that as instructions in our next one. Um, Now, besides fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, we have the care principle, which are newer, and they have originally started with the indigenous community in mind. And in the UK, we don't necessarily have many applicable situations. However, it's really important to think of care more widely because care is very focused on ethical use, ethical collection of data. It stands for collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. Especially the ethics, the responsibility, and ethics part. Again, even if we're not working with indigenous communities, it's really important to have a think of how to not only be fair, but be fair in care, because we do want to respect our participants, do no harm to our participants, and do as they would like us to do on their data. Now, a couple of more success stories when it comes to good research data management practices. There are so many to choose from. These were only a few that came to mind. For example, with Understanding Society data, the largest cohort panel study in the UK, researchers looked at the way engaging with arts, cultures, and sport can lead to greater satisfaction with life. Um, English longitudinal study of aging was able to give insight into how enjoying later life can be linked to living longer, but also the impact of social isolation and loneliness on mortality in older people. The Millennium Cohort study was used to investigate the conditions associated with parental involvement with children for policy recommendations. The Family Resource Survey was used to analyze migrants' experiences of poverty and to compare them with the experiences of UK-born people, again, for policy recommendations. And these are only a few examples of what good can happen when data are shared, despite this data not necessarily being collected in the first instance with these ideas in mind, they are able to have such fantastic policy influence. On to data management planning now. Um, it's really important when we talk about data management to bear in mind that different organizations will have different data management planning requirements. They usually provide a template, but from a generalized perspective, a data management plan should always include a data description. So, what is the new data that you're collecting, if there is any new data, and what is existing data that you're using? Or for example, I've identified there is a gap, there is no existing data to address my specific research question. What are the ethical and legal considerations and how we will ensure compliance with those? When it comes to the curation of data, how are you going to organize, format, and document that data throughout the research data lifecycle? How are you going to make sure the data is secure? How are you going to store it and how are you going to back it up? And especially for this one, for a couple of others as well, but especially for this one, it's really important to get in touch with your institution as well, with the IT department at your institution, because different institutions will have different storage and backup alternatives that they offer. A lot of institutions nowadays offer a tiered model. Are you working with personal data? Are you working with non-personal data and so on? So it's really important to reach out to them. Also, a data management plan should include data sharing strategies. How are you going to share that data at the end of the project? What data are you going to share? Is it going to be documented? And finally, but again, not least, the responsibilities and resources. In responsibilities and resources, I know from other researchers, they always feel that, oh, this is a tick box exercise. In practice, it can come in so handy to actually write down, so person X is doing A, person Y is doing B, because if anything happens, say for example, long-term sickness, anything can happen in today's world, right? You can then mitigate the risk far, far more easier. And it's also thinking about, are there any resources that I could, for example, gain directly from my institution, or the funder might be able to help me if there are costs. For example, with the archiving of data, should I add that in my proposal? So I know while some researchers think the responsibilities and resources can be a tick box exercise, in practice, they come in very, very handy. We do currently have in-depth guidance on our website for the ESRC specific DMP. However, there are changes coming. In the new funding service, currently there is a 500 words question when it comes to the data management planning for now, but that will change in due course. Probably we're talking about January 2026 for these changes to take place. There will be some stakeholder engagement. We will be inviting researchers to join us and give their views on data management planning moving forward. Now, another key consideration when it comes to data management planning is the DMP should not be a static document. I make my bids, for example, I want to apply for this specific funding call, I put a DMP and then I forget about it. No. The whole point of the DMP is to be a living document and to update it as research changes. And we know research will change. We plan, for example, to do this type of survey and this type of focus group, and then people are not available for the focus group, and they need to turn into semi-structured interviews and so on. It's really important to keep that data management plan up to date because it keeps a track of exactly what you've done. And it makes it far easier when you're sharing that data to actually provide the context that is needed alongside the data. So, why is data management planning essential? Well, it helps us anticipate and prepare, keep on track on the different work packages that we have, secure the different resources, and sometimes identify the different resources that didn't even cross our mind to begin with. Think ahead about the storage and safeguarding the data, helping us with sharing fair data and ensuring reproducibility, and of course, meet funders' expectations as well. Now, the DCC, the Digital Curation Center, have created this fantastic DMP online, a web-based platform to help researchers create, review, and share different DMPs that meet institutional and funder requirements. If you've never had a look at DMP online, I urge you all to take half an hour to have a look at DMP online. It's a fantastic resource. They always keep in touch with the funders and the institutions to make sure that the different templates are correct and up to date. They provide some fantastic guidance depending on the template as well. You can share the DMP with colleagues so that they can have a look at and comment on it. And you can even publish your DMPs as well. And again, from a transparency point of view, it's actually really good to publish your DMPs. Very short Menti exercise. Um, what do you think is the most important component of a data management plan? Still the same link, still the same code. And thank you once again for sorting out the issues with the slides. Again, we'll be making sure we include that in our guidance, the pop-up window. And thank you so much, Emma, for putting in the link again in case Chrome or Edge or whatever browser you're using was closed. That's fantastic. Getting responses in. We have a trick question. All are is equally important. Most of you did realize I was being tricky with this question. All of them are just as important as the other. And this is why we're talking about the data lifecycle and research data management overall, because you might do fantastic when it comes to ethical and legal compliance, but then you're storing the data on a USB stick that gets lost, or you're not curating the data, and when it comes to sharing the data, you don't have absolutely no contextual information documented. So all of them are just as important. Now, on to ethical and legal considerations. This is just a brief overview. We do have a couple of dedicated sections on this. Why must we consider ethics when it comes to research? Well, it maximizes benefits and it minimizes risks. Again, I can't stress enough. At the end of the day, our aim is do no harm to research participants. It ensures that participation is voluntary, and we get informed consent whenever possible. There are situations where informed consent might not be possible, and this is where discussions with ethic boards are really important to make sure that ethically we are still doing what we should be doing. We respect our participants' rights and dignity, and we ensure integrity and transparency. And we also make sure that we actually have clear responsibilities. We know who is responsible for what, and we give independence to our participants as well. We do have a dedicated workshop around the role of informed consent in ethical data collection, sharing, and reuse on the 13th of May from 10 to half 11. It's still open for registration. My colleague Hina is fantastic, and she goes through different types of what sentences should we use in a consent form, what sentences should we not use in a consent form, and over our consent template as well. So if you're free on the 13th of May, 10 a.m. to 11:30, please do sign up. All the slides are made available, so you can simply click the link as soon as we upload them on the website just a little bit later today. When it comes to legal considerations, a lot of research data will contain personal data to begin with. There are research projects that do not in the social sciences. There are some surveys anonymous by design, perfectly fine. However, most of the research data will contain personal data elements, and it's really important to make sure that the data handling is lawful. In the UK, we have the UK GDPR, the Data Protection Act. We have the new bill that's in the Parliament now, third reading, I think. So there's actually quite a lot from a legal point of view that we need to ensure that we do properly and well. We talk about, for example, data minimization and anonymization. What type of data am I collecting? Do I actually need all of this data that I'm collecting? When I share the data, should I share the data as is, or actually secondary researchers don't need, for example, the full address of my respondent, or they don't need the name of my respondent, and so on. Or with ages, I want to share the data as widely as possible. Maybe banding ages wouldn't hurt data usability. So there's a lot of considerations there. There's also considerations around storage and access controls when it comes to the legal compliance. So if we're talking about personal data, we can't transfer that data outside of specific regions, right? We can, but we need to have additional agreements in place, and we need to make sure that we've told our research participants that we're doing that. So again, thinking about where is the data going to be stored. Is it in the UK? Is it in the EEA, or adequacy, or countries with adequacy decisions? Do I need to worry, or this is not personal data? Also, data retention and disposal. And again, very important to check your institutions. Policies. Different institutions might have slightly different data retention schedules. Regularly, when we talk about personal data, 5-10 years when it comes to research data can apply. Have seen 3 years deleted as soon as possible as well. It's all quite changing, and of course with the new bill even more might change in due course. But when it comes to data retention schedule and disposal as well, checking with your institutions what is expected from them is highly important. What are the data sharing protocols? Am I going to share personal data? Am I going to share effectively anonymized data? Am I going to share anonymized data under open licenses? How am I going to do that? And to bear in mind is when it comes to data sharing, you can always share multiple versions of the data, right? You can share, for example, some data that's more granular under stricter, maybe even a data sharing agreement in place is personal data, right? But I also share a very aggregate data set that can be used, for example, for teaching purposes, that maybe could be shared under standard terms and conditions under an end user license agreement. It's also about ensuring fairness, transparency, and accountability, of course, but also intellectual property rights. And in one of the mentees, acknowledgement did come up. And again, research data management ensures that proper acknowledgement is given to the data creators. This is why we talk about responsible repositories, sharing data where there is going to be a data citation, your name, your institutions are going to be present, so others can properly acknowledge the data. There is a question about AI is changing anonymization. This is an overview of research data management, and I'm afraid if I start talking about AI and anonymization, again, we might be here for the entire day. We do have an anonymization specific workshop. It's in one of the slides, so I'll be able to confirm the date shortly, and we can go in a little bit more depth about AI and anonymization with that one, because of course it is a concern that researchers have, funders have, data providers have, everyone has, realistically speaking. And again, the new ICO guidance is fantastic. They've just published it last Friday, not this Friday, the previous Friday. So that might be worth a read as well. We do have a dedicated workshop on ethical and legal guidelines in data sharing. That is on the 8th of May between 10 a.m. and 11:30. So if this is something that you want to learn more about, please do sign up. There's still plenty of time to register until the 8th of May. Now, a short Menti exercise. How do ethical and legal considerations in data management affect the integrity and impact of research? Now, have a look at the chat while we get some ethical and legal considerations responses. We are getting answers. I was not clicking the screen. So once again, how do ethical and legal considerations in data management affect the integrity and impact of research? They are fundamental. Yes, they are fundamental. Validity, yes, they ensure validity. Appropriate limiting of accessibility. Validity again, greater integrity, where how findings can be shared, who they can reach, fantastic. Publishability, yes, I have not heard that word before, but I love it. Publishability can impact the accessibility of sensitive data. Yes, very true, because we do need to be very considerate. We are working with human participants. We want to do no harm. Significantly fantastic. Formal part is time consuming. Yes, I know the ethical reviews can be time consuming, but they are meant to be really thorough to make sure that we actually do the best by our research participants. And it's actually, I would say to all researchers, it's really best to properly spend time on that from the beginning of the project. When you start coming up with an idea, oh, I want to collect this type of data. Okay, let's have a talk with the ethics board. This is what I want to do, because the back and forth sometimes can even take months. But again, at the very end, you end up with not only compliant data, but in your heart, knowing that you've done best by your participants. I do take data very, very personally. So we are protecting participants. We are maintaining and building trust as well. I mean, if we look at all the platforms that are sharing and selling data, some of them, there's a huge scandal with the 23andMe nowadays. They're sharing the DNA data of everyone that did a test with them. As ethical researchers, we want to build trust in the community. We are not commercial companies looking to sell their data and make money out of it. We are trying to better society. We are trying to change policies for everyone's benefit. They do enable sharing and collaboration as well. That long-term impact, we make the data available. Our research is reproducible, but also others can conduct other research that again is reproducible. And of course, they enable appropriate risk management, because depending from one project to another one, there might be, some of them will have considerable risks depending on the type of data that you're collecting. You might be collecting even biological samples. How do you store those? There are even more concerns there. Not necessarily concerns, but challenges that need to be brought in mind. Now, data security, storage, and backup. Again, all the slides are made available with all the different links. I know there's a lot of information, but we're trying to cover as much as possible, so then you can follow up on the different specific elements that are most used to you. And of course, hopefully get in touch with us if there's something we can help with. Now, At all times, data must be protected from unauthorized access, use, change, disclosure, and also destruction as well. There have been situations way in the past, now storage is far better, but where data was accidentally destroyed even before publishing findings. So you can imagine what pain that is. When it comes to a digital backup strategy, again, do get in touch with your institutions where you are conducting the research. They will be using different platforms for data storage, servers, physical servers in some cases. But some general considerations are controlling access to the computer that you're accessing the data to. So, for example, using passphrases and always locking your machine when away from it. This all applies to secondary data as well. Having up-to-date antivirus and firewall protection, having power surge protection, again, otherwise data can be destroyed. Restricting access to sensitive materials. So you might have a research team that helps, for example, with the analysis itself. Would they need access to the original consent forms that are signed by everyone? Probably not. So restricting access to that to only the people that should have access to that specific type of data, keeping personal data separate, secure, and encrypted, using encryption, for example, on all devices, be it desktops, laptops, memory sticks, or even phones. On all locations. So if you, for example, have an nowadays most organizations do that, they give us a laptop, right, to work from home. We work hybridly, we take it at work as well. Making sure that that's encrypted. Most likely your institution is going to be doing that anyways. Check with them, always check with them. Controlling physical access to buildings, rooms, and filing cabinets is needed. You might, for example, the consent forms, retain them for 12 months, 18 months in a file cabinet. Well, if that's the case, that file cabinet must be securely locked and access must be properly restricted to that. And of course, properly dispose of data and equipment as needed. Now, when it comes to data disposal, and again, this is something that comes up quite a lot in secondary research as well. If you download, for example, from the UK Data Service a safeguarded file, we are talking safeguarded in terms of effectively anonymized data, so there's still a lot of usability from a secondary researcher perspective, but ages might have been banded, locations might have been aggregated, we only have government office region instead of proper postcodes and so on. Just clicking and saying delete, then that file goes to the trash. That is not appropriate data disposal. There's actually software out there that ensures data is properly deleted from your laptop, from your servers, from your any hardware in general. These are only a few examples. Your institution might have other tools that they use. Some of them have specific licenses, so you have to buy them and subscriptions and all of that. But your institution will know what are the software for data disposal that we can make use of. And of course, when it comes to physical data as well, actually having certified shredders, they go into a different paper as well when they're taken to be disposed of from the room. We have a lot of information when it comes to data storage on the website, from standard storage, where do I keep the data, how do I encrypt the data, how do I ensure the security of the data, how do I back up, how do I do checksum to ensure checksums are helping us to ensure when we transfer from point A to point B, we haven't lost or corrupted any type of data. Very easy to use. It's freeware that you can use as well, so there's no subscription to that. Worth having a look at that as well. And of course, some further information on disposal. Quick Menti on disposal. Which of the following will not fully erase data from a hard drive? Yes, we're getting answers. Fantastic. This is the one. Deleting files via the recycle bin trash function will not fully erase the data, and we should never rely on that. If you have any questions, again, your institution will be able to advise you on their specific tools that they're using, but also please do get in touch with us as well. We might be able to help in terms of finding a dedicated software to ensure that the data is properly deleted. Um, so using a dedicated erasure tool will enable for the data to be fully erased from the hard drive. Do apologize, I'm keeping a track on the chat as well. So I'm so glad people are able to join us, and everything will be made available online. We know it's an hour and a half of your time, but hopefully it's useful information, and you can use the slides later on as well. Now, on to data curation, formatting, organizing, and anonymizing data. Now, when it comes to file formats, we like to think of setting up a strategy. And this strategy consists of a few questions. What format is best suited for data creation? So when you're actually creating the data, what format is best suited for data analysis and other planned uses? They might be different. What format is best suited for long-term sustainability and the sharing of the data? As discussed a bit earlier, it might be that we need a CSV file for preservation. It's an open, non-proprietary format, but actually my survey data, I know a lot of students will want to make use of this data. It's very introductory, very fantastic for them. Let's make available SPSS and data as well, because most of them will be using those tools. Should you choose an open versus a proprietary format, it needs to be a conscious decision. Which one do we go for? Should the format be lossy or not? And is the format suitable for conversion? There are situations where some formats are not suitable for conversion between, say, for example, I don't know, JSON and SPSS. And I do want to have an SPSS as well. So where do I actually start? Now, on our web pages, we do make available a list of recommended file formats depending on the types of data. They're a mixture between proprietary and non-proprietary formats because, again, at the heart of this is actually the community that is going to be using the data. So, for example, when it comes to quantitative tabular data with extensive metadata, proprietary formats such as SPSS, data, or SAS are recommended. Researchers will make use of those, but also delimited text and command files. So for each of them, for SPSS and data, you can have the setup files, as they're called, to be able to make the data with the metadata information available. When it comes to qualitative textual data, XML, or even rich text format that's open non-proprietary, but we do have a variety of qualitative textual data that's made available in Word format. It's very easy to convert to Word, from Word to rich text, or ASCII, just .text files as well. And again, it's always making, if we go back to the previous slide, if my slides will work, making that conscious decision. Should you choose an open versus a proprietary format? What will the secondary researchers be using the data in? When it comes to version control, it's inevitable that you'll have so many different versions of the data. As collected, we've anonymized it, it went through quality checks, and you'll end up with so many different version files. It's important to identify the milestone versions that you want to keep. To uniquely identify these different versions. So when I'm looking at all my project information, can I actually track this is, I don't know, the anonymized version, this is the data I've collected, this is the quality checked version, and so on. To record the changes, and again, depending from the software that is being used, that can be done directly in the file So with Word documents, right, you can just use track changes, and it does it for you. Or you can compare the different files. You can bring both of them, and it compares the different versions. You can have a dedicated document that actually records all the changes. That is advisable because that information can actually be included in the user guide that's made available with the data. Record the different relationships between the different data items that you have as well. Where are the files located? If you have and you will have multiple locations for the files. Don't just save them in one place. Make sure you synchronize all the different backups as well. And then have the one location for the storage of the milestone in the master versions that you're going to be using. Again, we have far more information available on the website around this, and all the links are in the slides. When it comes to file naming, again, it's really good. And it sounds time consuming because, oh, yet another strategy we need to come up with. It doesn't take very long. It's just a file naming strategy. What are my file names going to contain? And there are a few elements that we always advise as best practices. So having meaningful but brief names, and we're giving a couple of examples right later on. Use dates. Our preferred format is year, month, day. It can be the other way around. It can be realistically any format that you wish, as long as that's clear. So rather than one file, for example, has the 4-digit year, the 2-digit month, and the 2-digit day, and then you do it the other way around for some 4-digit year, 2-digit day, and 2-digit month. It becomes very confusing. You need to make sure you just use it the same throughout. At the archive, we just prefer this format. Avoiding capitalization where possible. There are some computer platforms that can be case sensitive, especially Unix. That's an issue, for example, at the archive we have with our Death Star program that ensures further discoverability into quantitative data, especially for students or newer, I would say, people within the analysis data analysis community. Avoid using spaces, dots, and special characters, just using hyphens or underscores between the different words. Making sure that you don't include the extension within the name. We have seen it happen, for example, user guide docx, just trying to keep that extension just as the extension, including the versioning, of course, and reviewing the file names for archive version to ensure that they do not contain any confusing or irrelevant information. So for your purposes, for example, say you have a Stata file, you've come to version 10, which you're happy that's the version that you want to archive. You shouldn't archive the version that says underscore v10. It should be v1 archiving because that's the final version that you want to archive. Now, very quick Menti, um, based on just the information previously, which is an advisable file name example? No, and thank you all for joining. It's always difficult to find the time that works for as many people as possible, and especially with Easter coming, it's becoming very difficult to plan days. But again, all the materials will be made available, the recording as well, and you can please do get in touch with us. As I said, that is the takeaway home message, to just get in touch with us. We do not want anyone stressing, and we might be able to help you with that. That's fantastic. Most of the answers were correct. That is an advisable file name. The one with the spaces is those spaces. We try to avoid spaces. We put hyphens or underscores in between words. And these are a few examples. Again, our file naming strategy can be realistically half of a word page. Just explaining. I start with the project number right at the beginning. Then I actually mention the name, the wave of the study, what edition that data is, and then last edited and I have the date in this specific format. Um, it doesn't have to take a day to create this file naming strategy by any means, but just having that documented somewhere, especially with teams that work across multiple researchers, is really important because otherwise file name will become really confusing. Now, when it comes to variable formatting and measure levels, a very simple but important aspect is to determine whether the data are to be treated as string or numeric when we talk about survey data. And why? Because we have seen data coming in incorrect formatted, and then researchers that want to use the data end up having to do their own changes within the data to be able to use it, as we can imagine. Numerical values also need to be checked to ensure that the measurement level is correctly defined. There have been cases, and there's always cases as such, where, say, for example, you have a scale 1 to 5, and out of nowhere you have some 60s and some 7s. Probably there were a data entry error, but those need to be checked because then you can properly QA that file and make sure, oh, how do I change this for the archived version? When it comes to variable measure examples, again, when we're thinking about data and SPSS, having them defined properly, and they do use different terminology. For example, ethnicity in data would be categorical, in SPSS would be nominal. SPSS specifically does some bizarre things where it just brings a lot of variables that shouldn't be scaled as scale. Annual income banded in data is categorical, in SPSS is ordinal. Marital status, again, we have categorical in data, nominal in SPSS. When we talk about banded ages, categorical in data, ordinal in SPSS, and then monthly income, continuous in data, and scale in SPSS. It's just something to bear in mind when you're creating the data to be used by others, realistically by yourself as well, because you would be changing this for your own usages, so better to change them from the beginning. When it comes to quality assurance, it's really important to also document the changes that you've made to the data. This does provide a history. It's really fantastic for version control. So what changed from version 3 to version 4 and from version 4 to version 5 and so on. And it also provides this provenance trail. Quality check assurance may include double checking coding of observations or responses and the out of range values, checking data completeness, for quant data, adding variables and value labels, statistical analysis. We're doing some frequencies, means, ranges. For qualitative interview data, correcting errors made during the transcription, and they do happen more widely than we would like. When it comes to quant data, we have a tool. It's called QA My Data. It's an open source tool. You can build on it as well for those that have the software engineering hats on. It basically automates the detection of common issues in quantitative data. So missing values, duplicate values in your ID, they happen more, I would say, in trial data than other social science data. Outliers, it also helps detect direct identifiers. It uses regular expression, which are patterns. So it can detect, for example, anything that follows a pattern, a phone number, an email address, a postcode, all of these follow a pattern. And as long as you give it the pattern, it's going to be able to tell you, oh, yes, I found this in variable 300. It's easy to use. You do have to use command prompt, but it's a line that's all documented within the user guide. And we do welcome all researchers to make use of QA My Data as a tool to check their numerical data. When it comes to qualitative and linguistic data, Clarine are making some fantastic tools available within their infrastructure, and also the Clarine switchboard as well. They have different tools for tokenization, parsing, and annotation as well. They're all open source, so anyone can use them. And also ELAN. It's a flexible tool for annotating and analyzing audio and video data. It's quite new, but it's ideal for working with interview focus groups and observational data. And again, all of these are open. You don't have to pay a subscription for it. You can just use them and they are secure. Um, Oh, there is in the chat, because we were talking about AI earlier, about Copilot as well. Yes, the only consideration around Copilot is making sure that you are using an enterprise license when you still have full control of where that data is stored. So there are quite a lot of tools out there. For example, ChatGPT from OpenAI. I mean, that's a fantastic tool, right? But you don't have the guarantee of where that data is stored. And when asked, oh, yes, it's going to delete the data after 30 minutes or however long the session lasts, is still unsure whether anyone is able to access that data. With Copilot, it's worth investigating with your institution whether the enterprise, I think it's called an enterprise license, that protects the data that is actually being shared with Copilot, and it goes into the SharePoint that your organization, the Microsoft SharePoint that your organization is using. But again, definitely best check with your organization just to make sure that we are not using a tool that just shares the data without us knowing sharing the data. And oh, thank you all for joining. I know another some of you have had to go, but again, all the materials will be made available online. It's a lot to cover for just an hour and a half. Now, another short menti. Which of these practices is not part of quality assurance in research data management? That's fantastic. Responses are coming in. That is very correct. It is indeed skipping the review of out of range values. Really important. It can really affect secondary researchers. Now, data anonymization and key considerations. Every data source and data context is very different, but there are key number factors that should always be considered. What are the types of identifiers in the data that we have? Do we have direct and indirect identifiers? What are the types of data that we're working with? Are we working with survey data, audio and visual data, transcript data, bearing in mind with audio and visual, the voice recording of someone will always be personal data? What are the ethical considerations? What did we inform our participants that we're going to be doing with the data? And this is where sometimes things can go a little bit sideways. And then what are the data access, the data sharing strategies that we have in mind? Are we going to control access and how? Are we going to have user agreements and what type of user agreements? Are those going to be for personal data sharing or for anonymized data sharing? And so on. Um, we do have a dedicated anonymization workshop on the 22nd of May from 10 a.m. to 11:30. So still plenty of time until the 22nd of May. And we'll be sure to include a little bit about AI in as well. We always advise for this three-pronged approach to protecting participants, and anonymization can be considered in itself like separate. No, it's considered within this three-pronged strategy: consent, anonymization, and access. So throughout the consent procedure, I'm informing participants on how I'm going to be using their data, but also how I'm going to be sharing their data. The anonymization step is treating that data to reduce the risk of re-identification. However, always bearing in mind the data utility, because if I'm redacting absolutely everything or I'm not making available any socioeconomic information about my participants, secondary researchers are not going to be able to use that data. So it's balancing that, which is a delicate or as I've heard it called, the dark arts of anonymization. But this is where the access comes into account. Who will access the data? How will they access the data, and for how long? Should I actually have an end user license agreement that specifies how they can use the data, how they can share the data, if they can even share the data onwards, or other people will have to follow the same procedure and so on. And of course, in the UK, we're very, very fortunate to have legislation and existing frameworks that we can leverage. For example, the Five Safes framework that ensures secure access to personal and confidential data. There are a lot of semi-automated anonymization tools out there. The archive we really like is DC Micro, which is an R package, is all free. R is free as well. It does have a user-friendly interface, so you don't necessarily need to know how to work in R. There are 3 lines of code to open SDC Micro that you do need to run in RStudio, but that's it. Then it prompts up the really nice graphical user interface that you can just click buttons and make sure that you're anonymizing your data. QA My Data that we've discussed previously, very, very useful to detect direct identifiers, but also outliers, which again, those increase the disclosure risk. ARCs, mu argos, again for quantitative data. There are some tools for qualitative data as well. Quali Unknown, it's an open source tool developed by Quali Service. TextWash, again, uses Python to identify and replace direct identifiers. Fantafos, that's in development, but it's an open source desktop app that utilizes AI technology to anonymize text at scale and is running on named entity recognition. And again, we go through some of this during our anonymization workshop. I'm aware of the time. I do like to talk a lot, especially when it comes to research data management, but I do want us to make sure we have a few minutes for questions as well. Now, which of the following is a key consideration for effective data anonymization? We are getting answers in. The Menti is still working. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, again, I hope the tools and the different templates that we make available are going to make your journey far better. There's so many tools nowadays. We need to use them, make our life easier. Um, that's fantastic. Yes, a key consideration is actually balancing data with utility with the risk of re-identification. If we would be removing all data to prevent any further reuse, there is no point in us sharing that data anymore. It happens rarely, but it does happen when anonymization becomes a bit of an overzealous exercise, and then there's very little to be worked with. Now, data curation, metadata, and documentation. Metadata, I like this visual because data with metadata provides information. So we might have data, but if we don't have metadata, we don't have information. It's their mixture that provides the information. We do have best practices for documenting social science research data workshop on the 10th of June. For this one, even more plenty of time to register, again from 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And we're talking in far more depth why documenting data increases efficiency and accessibility of the data, the ethical and accurate data reuse, reproducibility and validation, compliance and ethical standards, and of course ensures long-term preservation. At the archive, we do like to separate the data documentation into 2 main descriptions, the data level documentation. So here we're talking about information on the individual data objects, such as variables in a data files or information about the interview transcript. And then study level documentation, which is the high level information about the overall collections that you've gathered, the research context. So when it comes to survey data, we might have variable labels, value labels. This is an example from an open openly available. Study, the citation is on the page. You can have a look if you're working with research data, with quantitative research data, to see how the variable and value labels are working. When it comes to interview data, having this data list that actually describes the different interviews that we're making available is really important. To bear in mind, in here we do make an example out of Pioneers of Social Research, where they had the consent to actually share the names of the people that have been interviewed, which might not be possible in your files. That's perfectly fine. We have a data list template that you can use and complete and remove certain fields as appropriate. So for example, you might not have collected age. You can remove that from the variable template list. When it comes to study level documentation, it's all about having, for example, the questionnaire that you've used and any user notes, a technical report. I gave the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey as an example because they're fantastic when it comes to documentation. But we need to bear in mind they are quite a big organization, right? So it might not be possible to provide as much documentation as these large-scale governmental surveys are able to do, but we should still be able to provide some information about how did we control for disclosure, what was the questionnaire that we used, how should others use the data, are there any limitations when it comes to data usage and so on. Oh, people are already um, doing the menti. That's fantastic. When should you document your data? We have at the beginning of the project, at the end of the project, and throughout the life cycle of the project. And we're getting fantastic answers. That is very, very correct. It's important to document your data throughout the life cycle of the project. You will be making your life 100 times more easier than having to do it right at the very end of the project, right at the very beginning. I'm not sure how that might work in practice, but doing it throughout the project, you are making your data sharing journey far, far more easier. Now, another Menti exercise when it comes to the documentation, because when it comes to data sharing, one thing that usually can go a bit sideways is the data documentation. The data is prepared fantastically, but there's no data documentation. Which of this is an example of effective data documentation? Summarizing only the main findings without context, limiting metadata to file names to save time, or providing detailed metadata and context for data. Easy questions after almost an hour and a half. Um, but yes, it's really important to have detailed metadata and the context for your data. This truly really ensures that the data can be used ethically by other researchers as well. When all of that information is lacking, you will get misuse by accident. Now, finally, data sharing strategies. There are various ways of sharing research data. There are domain-specific repositories, so you might have data service providers, archives, data centers. You have institutional repositories, especially with universities. Self-preservation and dissemination, just making the data, say I have a safe hard drive where I can store all my data and documentation, and I just make it available to people that contact me. There are commercial data sharing platforms, pardon me, and there's also direct submission with journal publications. Um, Realistically, all data sharing methods have advantages and disadvantages. But when we start to think about, okay, how do I share my data? It's very dependent from one research project to another one. But there are some key considerations that we need to think about. What is the purpose of the data sharing? What am I trying to achieve by sharing this data? How is the place or the route that I'm picking going to ensure that the data is fair? So findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. For example, with the self-preservation, data is not going to be fair because most likely there's going to be a note on your personal website saying, if you'd like the data, get in touch with me. That doesn't match fair. What is the contained in the data? Is the data sensitive? Is the data confidential? Do I need to think of different versions of data that needs to be shared? What are the ethical and legal implications of sharing the data the way I've decided to share? So, for example, sharing with a repository that doesn't necessarily check the contents of the file. You can just upload, you don't have any peer review being done, might have legal implications. You might end up sharing data that shouldn't be shared under the protocols used. What is the long-term preservation? If, for example, I have my own website, that's how I share my data. Is Am I going to be able to maintain that website in 100 years from now? Or what is the plan in 100 years from now? Am I going to find someone that's going to be able to do that for me? What are the security measures, but also the costs and resources involved in the data sharing method that I've chosen? What is the technology and infrastructure as well? Um, and what is the stakeholder engagement and support that the method I've chosen actually offers? Say, for example, with responsible repositories, you will actually get what is called user support. So trying to help secondary researchers use the data responsibly. This might not happen if I just share the data via a repository that I just found. I can upload everything, all is there, but they can't contact anyone if they have any questions and so on. So all of these are considerations to bear in mind. When I keep saying responsible repositories, I mean data services providers that host facilities that adhere to established standards and best practices in data management. This data service provider actually ensure the integrity, the preservation, and the accessibility of the data that they hold. And similar to how we have FAIR for data, we have the trust principle for repositories. They stand for transparency, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and technology. Is the Research Data Alliance people that came up with these trust principles. We can't have properly fair data without having repositories that follow the trust principle. So they're all interlinked, much more interlinked than originally thought. Deposit license agreements, again, when we share our data, it's important to see whether the responsible repository, the repository, it's been a long an hour and a half, repository that we're sharing the data with has a deposit license agreement in place. So what are my responsibilities when I'm putting my data collection with them? What is their responsibility? Are they going to share that data ethically and legally? And are they going to do any enhancements for that data as well? So data deposit license agreement is basically establishing, as a researchers, what are your responsibilities regarding the collection, and as a data service provider, what are their responsibilities? Will they, for example, create additional metadata or ensure that community endorsed metadata standards are being used and so on? Ideally, you should be looking at repositories that do have a license agreement. We call it a deposit license agreement, but it could have other terminology, just license agreement or even an end user license agreement. At the end of the day, you are an end user looking to share that data, but it's important to check that. What if I use secondary data? It's really, really important to check the license under which the data are made available. We have had situations where researchers that use secondary data, they wanted to share that data for onward sharing with other researchers. But that data was actually shared under conditions clearly saying derived data can only be shared with the permission of the original data depositor. We can help by all means to negotiate this data sharing. However, you can always share your code. And we have some guidance around code and syntax files in general. They need to be clean and well formatted. Avoid including unnecessary personal information, names specifically of researchers that have worked on the file. Um, having comments, actually explaining to others, so here I have derived this in this way and so on, including the full citation, including the persistent identifier, the digital object identifier for the data that was used, having in-depth metadata describing the files and methods used. So again, that code file is still going to have discovery metadata alongside it, and it's important for that to be in-depth. And also having a README or a methods document that describes why you have derived the data, what was the original purpose, how you've derived it, and so on. If you are unsure where to share your data, of course, you can always get in touch with us. We're here to help as much as we can. But you can also check r3data.org. It's a comprehensive registry of research data repositories that has been active for over a decade now. And it provides a curated index of more than 3,000 repositories worldwide, covering all academic disciplines. Now, very, very quickly, which of the following is an example of a responsible data sharing approach? We still have people on. Thank you so much for the very kind feedback in the chat. All the information will be made available. I do apologize. I do talk a lot. We are over time by 2 minutes. Be over time by 5 minutes by the time I get to the questions. So the question was, which of the following is an example of a responsible data sharing approach, depositing data in a domain-specific repository with appropriate access control? That is winning, and that is the correct option here. That is fantastic. And again, any questions, any concerns, please do get in touch. We are here to help. I've included some more tools and templates and different tutorials that we make available, including the data list template, for example, or the transcription template. And again, everything will be made available shortly after the event online. Now, as promised, final Menti of the day. But we started with a question: how confident do you feel in managing data? Well, we're finishing with the very same question: how confident do you feel in managing data now? Again, everything is anonymous, so there's please be as truthful as possible. We're getting some very confident and extremely confident, which is fantastic. I truly hope all the different tools and all the different templates will be helpful in the additional workshops that we're doing as well, because they focus on specific key elements. There is only so much one can cover in an hour and a half. And we have in chat. No, thank you. That's fantastic. The feedback that we're getting, I'm overwhelmed by the feedback. As you can see, I do love talking about research data management. So glad that you are learning so much, and we do hope that you'll join us for the other workshops as well. Again, all of them are just the same. It's about sharing this information, getting to know you, and hopefully you will get in touch with us if you have other questions, especially project specific questions. We do have one question in our Q&A directly in Zoom. Does anyone know how many higher education courses include requirements? 1, for the student to be aware of secondary data sets, and 2, for the student to have an available and updated index of available secondary data sets? I do not have an answer to that, I'm afraid. It's a fantastic question, and I would love to think that a lot of higher education courses actually include this requirement, but I would think not many do. The ones that used to offer the Q-Step program, they used to have that, but that's something that we can certainly investigate. And if it's something that you would like us to delve a bit deeper in, by all means, do drop us a line. We can always have a Zoom or Teams. So very happy to see that some people are very confident. Not at all confident. We don't have any of those. So that's fantastic. Thank you all ever so much. I will follow up with all the questions on the Padlet. You have 48 hours to still keep adding questions, and I'll type all of them in, and I'll make available a nice PDF for all of you to follow up with some additional links as well. but just so that we're still over time by 5 minutes. So I do apologize. Thank you all ever so much for joining us today. Once again, please do get in touch with any questions you might have. And if you have some time just after the event to complete the evaluation survey, that would be fantastic. It just helps us learn from you and do even better and nicer webinars. Thank you all so much. Thank you.